Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Korea Economic Institute of America. Thank you all for coming, especially with the weather we've had and the cold day we have today. My name is Nicholas Hamasevich, and I am the Director of Research and Academic Affairs here at KEI. We are excited to have this interesting event with our academic paper series, looking at the expanding transportation networks and their impact on South Korean Mongolian energy cooperation. New possibilities with railway transportation and development programs like the Greater Tumen Initiative are opening up the region around Mongolia, China, Russia, and the Korean Peninsula, increasing trade and cooperation between these countries. This is especially important as each of these nations are looking to increase their economic growth, expand their bilateral relationships, and develop the lesser established areas of their countries. So KEI is pleased to welcome back Dr. Alicia Campy to KEI to talk to us today about her paper on South Korea-Mongolia relations, the growth of these transportation networks, and the possibility for energy cooperation. Dr. Alicia Campy is a visiting fellow at the Reischauer Center at Johns Hopkins SAIS. She also had a fellowship at the East-West Center to work on Mongolian energy and mineral developments and their effect on Northeast Asia economics. Dr. Campy had a long diplomatic career with the U.S. Department of State, with posts in places like Singapore, Tokyo, the United Nations, and Mongolia. In 2009, her book entitled The Impact of China and Russia on United States-Mongolian Political Relations in the 20th Century was published. She was awarded Mongolia's Friendship Medal by President Bagbandi in 2004, and the Polar Star, Mongolia's highest medal, by President George in 2011. She has her A.B. from Smith College, M.A. from Harvard University, and Ph.D. from Indiana University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Campy.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and I would like to thank the Korea Economic Institute for sponsoring my research on this topic and for hosting this event today. I'm also very grateful that we have members from the Mongolian Embassy here, who I recognize, and I'm sure will have their own perspective on some of the elements of my speech. Today we're going to talk about the Greater Tumen Initiative, called GTI, which is a renaming of a program called the Tumen River Area Development Program. It is a regional cooperation mechanism among the Republic of Korea, the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, in other words, North Korea, Mongolia, and the Russian Federation, which is supported by the UN Development Program. So this slide reflects in the yellow the extent of the Tumen River Association boundaries covering these countries. In 1995, GT member governments signed agreements to establish this mechanism with the goal of strengthening economic and technical cooperation to obtain greater growth and sustainable development in Northeast Asia, particularly in the Greater Tumen region. The GTI focuses on the priority areas of transport, trade and investment, tourism and energy, with environment as a cross-cutting sector. The GTI vision is for a partnership for prosperity among neighbors with the goal to become an effective platform for regional capacity building, economic cooperation, expanding policy dialogue, improving business environment, and contributing to Northeast Asian peace and stability. The core decision-making institution inside the GTI is its consultative commission, composed of vice ministers from GTI member governments. The Commission's role is to foster support for regional cooperation and development and promote mutual understanding. It convenes annually to discuss key policy issues and cooperation projects and hosts joint sessions with strategic partners and local governments. In addition, the GTI works closely with international partners to jointly promote the region and hosts both the Northeast Asian Export-Import Banks Association and the Local Cooperation Committee. It has established strong partnerships with regional governments, international organizations, and the private sector to jointly initiate cooperative activities. Both a skilled and low-cost labor pool is available in the Tumen River Basin, and so it is at the crossroads of vital trade, transport, and energy routes. Rich in gas, oil, and minerals, the region has easy access to affluent markets and hundreds of millions of Northeast Asian consumers. Increased regional cooperation is projected to not only lead economic prosperity and sustainable development, but also to contribute significantly to regional solidarity and stability. For South Korea, the GTI represents an important opportunity to actualize the Eurasia Initiative announced by President Park Geun-hye in October 2013. The Eurasian Initiative is a proposal to link rail and road networks, energy and logistics infrastructure from Korea's Busan across the Eurasian continent to Europe in a modern Silk Road Express. One potential energy mineral resource partner for the ROK could be Mongolia. Mongolia, for its part, is a rapidly developing resource economy, rich in coal, natural gas, petroleum, copper, gold, and uranium, but overwhelmingly dependent upon China as its customer because of poor northeast outbound transportation routes. It is determined to find new mineral customers in Northeast Asia to break the Chinese monopoly over its economy and diversify trade partners. The GTI's transportation grid design meshes completely with Mongolia's intention to reorient its minerals and its customers from China to consumers in Korea, Japan, and Europe. Active ROK partnering initiatives for railroad development with Mongolia and Russia to improve regional transport infrastructure and ease transport border transportation passages would have an immediate impact on existing Jilin China International Cooperative Demonstration, the demonstration zone, which includes the participation of 48 South Korean and 48 Chinese regional governmental agencies and offices. So let's go back to the map, and here we can see that North Korea here is looking for greater cooperation with and access to China, and we have here this zone which we were talking about called the Jilin, which over here is developing an international zone, free trade zone for companies that would be able to participate in this Tumen River Initiative. Now, the active partnering with these companies in this area is would rely on a new railroad development project. And this, coupled with Chinese railway construction traveling towards North Korea, will connect the Tumen and Yalu rivers as well as link North Korea's major cities with China and other regional countries. These efforts then have the potential to boost the construction of Northeast Asian international transit corridors and to promote the cross-border economic and energy cooperation sought in President Park's Eurasia Initiative. Now, any new rail development undertaken by South Korean companies also holds specific benefits for each of the GTI countries and should spur competition over Mongolian and Siberian Russian minerals. While these rich coal, copper, gold, petroleum, natural gas, rare earth, and uranium resources could be moved to willing Korean customers, it is just as probable that they would find new economic partners in Asia and across the Pacific. Thus, the GTI members are likely to overcome any present political impasses to realize the goal of greater transportation integration. Now let's talk a little bit about Mongolia and the Mongolian economy. Here we have on this slide the major points about the Mongolian economy and its rich mineral resources and its monopoly at present by China. China receives more than 90% of all of its trade, and how Mongolia is looking at the GTI concept as a way to build northbound rail links and also eventually pipe and road links into Russia, out to the west or to the east to new customers. Now, the 14th meeting of the Consultative Committee of the GTI and the Northeast Asian Economic Cooperation Forum was held in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia from October 30th to November 2nd of last year. Vice ministers of the GTI member nations discussed regional cooperation and development strategy in the Northeast Asia region, reaffirmed the significance of GTI in building regional partnership for common prosperity, and reviewed transforming its strategic direction into an independent organization by 2016. The focus of the discussions evolved from GTI's report on cross-border facilitation that was issued in February of 2013. As the Northeast Asian region has enormous potential for development, especially in port arrangement and infrastructure construction, one of the prime challenges discussed at this year's consultative committee was how financing institutions can meet demand from the private sector and what kind of channels can be provided in bringing about regional economic prosperity. The Northeast Asia Economic Forum, which followed the dialogue on Northeast Asia economic and development cooperation, took place immediately following the Consultative Commission's meeting. This session focused on the legal status of the GTI program and assessed project implementation on consolidating structures of trans-border transportation passages and simplification of border entrances. The forum brought together more than 100 delegates from the GTI member governments, the business sector, and financing associations. This round of consultation established the Northeast Asia EXIM Bank Association, which consists of the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of Korea and also of China, the Development Bank of Mongolia, and Russia's State Corporation Bank for Development and Foreign Economic Affairs. The Bank Association's main function, this new association's main function, is to collaborate with the GTI and member governments in financing suitable economic projects in the region. The Association of Development Financing institutions in Asia and the Pacific, called the ADFIAP, came to the forum to share its knowledge and insight into the strategic prospects of economic integration in Northeast Asia, with long-term goals of strengthening trade and investment ties, promoting partnerships, and synergizing efforts on Northeast Asian regional development. All parties reached legal agreement to further develop the GTI into an international organization and to increase financial support for it. Now, Korea made some additional proposals at that meeting, which were also accepted. The organization agreed to organize an agricultural sector board, regularly holding a GTI International Trade and Investment Expo, and setting up a strong network among policy research institutions. The next GTI Consultative Commission meeting will be held in China in 2014. So now, first, let's look at Mongolia's view about rail development in the region and what are its aims. Because Mongolia annually exports about 100 million tons of mostly raw materials, it seeks to construct a new railroad north to diversify its customers and relieve congestion on the southern rail route to China. Mongolia only has one north-south railroad called the Ulaanbaatar Railway and no east-west rail crossing the country. So again, going back to our map, the North-South Railroad, this is the capital of Mongolia in Ulaanbaatar, basically goes into China this way. There is no east-west road at all. So even Mongolia in the west is not serviced by rail. In this kind of situation, it's important to see that freight turnover on the existing Ulaanbaatar Railway has been growing annually. In 2012, freight turnover was about 20.4 million tons, and in 2013, it increased another 2.7 million tons. As a result, Mongolia wants to build 4 new accesses into China and another 2 accesses into Russia. An enormous investment estimated at around $1 billion. In 2010, the Mongolian parliament approved the governmental policy to develop railway transportation capacity, especially as related to mining and transit. Mongolian minerals right now that are being developed are mainly in the Gobi area in the south here. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't minerals in this vast section of the country. There hasn't been the exploration data, and because the original exploration surveys were along the areas serviced in the zone that the railway covered, that's why we have most intensive development in the eastern part of Mongolia. But it doesn't mean at all that that's the only place where Mongolian minerals are located. The Mongolians have decided that this enormous investment of $1 billion should be sought mainly from China and Russian sources. In October 2013, Mongolia signed an agreement to establish a working group with China to cover the construction of new road, rail, and pipeline infrastructure connecting the two countries with Russia. A Mongolian official later explained that landlocked Mongolia aimed to become a transit corridor to facilitate trade between the two giant neighbors and reduce the costs of delivering Russian commodities like oil and natural gas to Chinese markets. This topic was further discussed with PRC Prime Minister Li Keqiang in Mongolian Prime Minister Nurov Altunhuyak's mid-October visit to Beijing, which resulted in plans to organize a working group to allow Chinese firms to invest and build additional transit infrastructure in Mongolia. Now in Mongolia, a domestic rail link to the Russian Far East is now under construction, and half of a direct line into China has been completed, with this project scheduled to be completed by 2015. The Mongolian Development Bank dispersed an initial funding of $55 million for the design and survey of an 1,800-kilometer new railway project, and an additional $200 million for construction work for a 243-kilometer rail spur from the Tavan Tolgoi giant coal uranium mine in the south of the country, approximately around there, to the Chinese border. Mongolia complains that it has not received fair value for its coal because of the lack of alternative buyers to China. It hopes the improved transport infrastructure envisioned in the new GTI will allow it to generate more revenue from its coal sector by diversifying its mineral energy customers. Since Mongolia was a Soviet satellite, and its railway now is Russian gauge, Mongolian policymakers have chosen to expand this gauge domestically, which would favor mineral products flowing north into Russia and out to Pacific Rim customers. The importance of the China market, however, for Mongolia cannot be underestimated, with more than 90% of its exports delivered to China. Soaring Chinese demand for commodities like coal has resulted in a Mongolian double-digit growth rate since 2010. However, Chinese economic hegemony has fueled strong discontent among the Mongolian populace and its parliament. The lawmakers forced a change in the foreign investment law in 2012 to limit foreign ownership in strategic sectors such as mining. The country began awarding bids for route spur expansion to link large mineral deposits to the main Trans-Siberian rail system rather than approve Chinese gauge rail spurs directly to China. Mongolian construction contractors do not yet have the technical ability to handle this new rail construction, so they must partner with foreign expertise. Increasingly, South Korea is their partner of choice. This is supported by the fact that the ROK is Mongolia's fourth largest trade partner. From 1995 to 2005, the export of minerals, particularly gold, dominated Mongolian exports to South Korea, while the South Koreans sold transportation and machinery, electrical products to the Mongols, as well as textiles and foodstuffs. More recently, South Korean-Mongolian cooperation has been seen predominantly dominated by investment by the South Koreans in Mongolia's construction industry. Bilateral trade volume amounted to $230 million in 2010, an 85-fold increase from $2.7 million of trade in 1990, which is the beginning of Mongolia's democratic era. As evidence of Mongolia's desire to have the ROK as its preferred rail construction partner, on May 8, 2013, Samsung was commissioned by the Railway Authority of Mongolia as the sole contractor to implement the $483 million project to build the majority of the kilometers from the Tavantolgoi coal site to the Chinese border, as well as constructing a rolling stock depot. Mongolia has been actively expanding its international contacts with other Asian countries to develop the mechanisms for economic partnership. An example is its accession to the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement this past October. Another example of Mongolia's new interregional approach was the December 18, 2013 consultative meeting in Ulaanbaatar of the Mongolian-Russian-Chinese Northern Railway. The Mongolian Minister of Road and Transportation, Amarjal Gansuk, explained that Mongolia sought cooperation with its neighbors in freight transportation between Asia and Europe and would pay more attention to upgrading transportation facilities that would meet all necessary transit requirements for enhancing the Trans-Northern Railway corridor through Mongolia from Russia's Ulan-Ude to Jilin province in China. Now, what are South Korean plans for expansion of the Northeast Asian rail network? In the last 10 years, the ROK exports and overall trade have expanded. Exports valued at $556.5 billion in 2012 represented an increase of over 19% over the 2011 figure, and imports in the same period increased by more than 23%. The land transportation network for South Korea within the context of Northeast Asia is based on two vertical and two horizontal axes. So let's go again back to the map. The two horizontal axes are from the port of Busan in Korea to Dalian, China. So here we have Busan, and Dalian is right about here, the horizontal axis. And the other horizontal axis is from Dalian to Khabarovsk. From the Tumen River to Chita, along this horizontal axis. The vertical axis are from Busan to Vladivostok, this way, and from Dalian to Vladivostok. So right now, that's what exists in terms of transportation infrastructure. However, the transportation infrastructure throughout the region has many impediments. Due to different railway gauges, old transportation systems, bottlenecks at border points, biased air route allotment for national flag airlines, and complicated customs clearance systems. Nevertheless, if the Korean economy is to continue its expansion and feed its energy needs, these transportation connection challenges must be systematically overcome. On November 13th, 2013, President Park held a summit meeting with President Vladimir Putin in Seoul. and signed a memorandum of understanding that called for the steel giant POSCO, Hyundai, Merchant Marine Company, and Korea Railroad Corporation to participate in the Rajin Hasan development project. This project is designed to turn North Korea's ice-free northeastern port of Rajin into a logistics hub for sending cargo by rail to and from East Asia and Europe via the Russian Trans-Siberian Railway. After 5 years and $340 million of renovation, a 54-kilometer double-tracked rail link reopened in September 2013 between Rajin, North Korea's first special economic zone in 1991, and the nearby Russian town of Hasan. South Korean firms can now ship exports first to Rajin and transport them elsewhere via Russian railways. So where is this link? Right here. This would be right up in here. The port of Rajin, and just a small way across the border, the Russian small site of Hasan. On this particular project is developed by the Rosancontrans entity, which is a Russian-North Korean joint venture. And it is both a rail and a port renovation project. Russian Railways, a state monopoly, has a 70% stake in that joint venture. It was decided, and has been reported in the Korean news reports, that after a due diligence study to be conducted this year, a South Korean consortium of companies would buy about half of the Russian stake in the rail joint venture. This purchase, which is an indirect investment via Russia, seemingly is in conflict with Seoul's ban on new investments in the north of Korea. The partnering of the ROK with Russia on other long-term transportation construction projects, including building a natural gas pipeline linking Russia and South Korea via the north, and creating Arctic shipping routes to reduce shipping distances and time between Asia and Europe, are indications that South Korea is in fact responding to the challenge of developing new transportation links to mineral and energy resources. The Korean press has reported that the two countries, Russia and Korea, sovereign wealth funds agreed to set up a $500 million joint fund aimed at increasing cross-border investment in various companies and projects. But according to some Korean experts, the companies and any kind of cooperation with Russia still will struggle with the problem of the local bureaucracy and corruption. The Rajin Hasan development project fits neatly into President Park's Eurasian initiative. During the summit with Putin, she stated that her rail transportation energy strategy includes Eurasian energy linkage cooperation. Quote, logistics and energy network in the Eurasian region will not only reduce logistic costs and stimulate global trade, but will also stabilize raw materials costs and contribute to the growth of the world economy. If trade barriers are gradually taken down and Eurasia becomes a free trade zone, Eurasia could be made into a gigantic market like the European Union. Such a rail project has been talked about for many years. Called the Iron Silk Road, prospects for fruition often were stymied by strategic concerns. The Korean Railroad Research Institute, the ROK's think tank in the railway sector, has been researching how to connect trans-Korean and intercontinental rail networks to realize a borderless economic zone. It concluded that the construction of a logistics and transportation system is an important issue in the economic relations between the two Koreas. It recommended that first logistic bottlenecks needed to be resolved to secure a stable and cost-effective transportation route. In the long run, the completion of the Trans-Korean Rail would lead to the development of a strategic international multimodal transport route connecting Northeast Asia and Europe. Such railway development has been a major part of plans for development of North Korean special economic zones. And this concept closely coordinates with the GTI program. So therefore, it is expected that the GTI program would work well with South Korean concepts. This is a picture of the existing rail network that is available to the Russians. And now we have to speak for just a few minutes about the Russian rail network system. The Russian government has long felt that its Russian railways, called the RZD, contributes to the development of the transit potential of Russia. Its key transit route runs east to west. According to their 2012 annual report, Russian Railways has determined its potential is determined by many factors, but the most important factor for them now is the development of the Chinese economy. China's export infrastructure is overloaded. Its ports in the south are working at 20 to 25% above their planned capacity. At the same time, the workload of the rail infrastructure in China is 7 to 8 times higher than the average European level. So in response, the Russian Railroad feels that if it should become involved in projects to create the transit east-west corridor that would extend all the way into Western Europe, and at the same time would enable the Russian railways to have a larger transport market share and strengthen the competitive position of the Russian railway in relationship to alternative means of transport, such as pipelines, and attract transit freight traffic along the Russian rail network between Europe and the Pacific coast. The RZD seeks strategic cooperation with partners in the Asia-Pacific region in the fields of railway transport, logistics, and implementation of joint investment projects, because it needs investment in order to fulfill this plan. President Putin, early in 2000, aimed to develop the eastern Siberian regions furthest away from Moscow. His goal is to upgrade and extend the Trans-Siberian Railway network to the Korean Peninsula and lay new oil and gas pipelines across Siberia in order for Russia to become the key carrier for cargo and energy between East Asia and Europe. For the Russian railway network, the main driver of loading growth has been exports. In the Far East, network loading in 2012 beat the highest figure ever recorded in the entire history of the Far East, and that was a figure of 30% higher than previous figures. The highest gain in freight turnover has been seen in the eastern part of the rail system to the Far East, which has increased 5.7% compared to 2011, and if it's 32% higher if you compare it with 2007. Freight destinations continue to focus on the Russian ports. Since the incorporation of the Russian railway network in 2003, transportation to the Black Sea ports have increased by 41%, and to the Northwest and Far East ports by more than 200%. Because of the load factor of a number of sections of the rail are at peak, and the Railway Authority of Russia has determined that continued regular train service will require large-scale infrastructure investments. Now, this is part of the problems that the Russian railways face. Loading to ports of the Far East remains historically high. It continues despite expected stabilization. Nonetheless, the track infrastructure is quite defective. Fixed assets, which are still in operation, are long after their normal expired life. About 31% of all currently operated engineering structures were built before 1913. If current trends continue by the year 2015, the RZD predicts the serviceable life of 38% of the structures on the railway will have expired. So what kind of things are we talking about? For example, supports for the rail usually last for 80 to 100 years. Pipe culverts for 100 years, metal spans for 60 years. These are key parts of the railway that could collapse. In 2012, 3 sections of the Far Eastern Railway and 2 sections of the East Siberian Railway in the Russian Far East had limited capacity hauls. In other words, they already have reduced the amount of freight along them. There is a new study that is coming out by a gentleman named Russin Pittman. He has given me an advanced copy to look at, where he analyzes the Russian railroads restructuring program strategy for development until 2030. And he indicates that the significant expansion of the coverage and capability of the overall rail infrastructure is the key to the Russian railway future. An additional financial burden on the railway has been the agreement to increase its share of the capital joint venture of the Ulaanbaatar Railway. It owns 50%. The Mongolians own 50%. Both the Russian and Mongolian partners have authorized an increase of capital by $250 million to construct new rail infrastructures inside Mongolia. Also, the RZD was the one that funded the new rail line between Hassan and Rajin. This spur crossing through the GTI basin will enable the Russians and Mongols to use the North Korean port now as an alternative to the overcrowded Vladivostok port. So Russia also is looking for new partners to finance its own infrastructure and expansion. Putin's summit with President Park revolved around seeking South Korean participation in its various rail projects, including the Rajin Port's modernization. South Korea has shown interest in linking its largest port, Busan, to the DPRK. But any such investment has been barred since the sinking of a South Korean naval vessel in 2010, attributed to a North Korean attack. However, with the November ROK, Russian summit agreement, and the overall progress in this year's GTI discussions, it is anticipated that South Korean cooperation with Russia on new rail infrastructure will accelerate. So now, in conclusion, When looking at energy demands and growth in Northeast Asia, researchers such as Kent Calder of Johns Hopkins have noted that, quote, Northeast Asian countries also face serious and unique developmental challenges that would make a deeper and richer local network of regional organizations mutually advantageous, end of quote. He has discussed the organizational gap and the rise of pressure for more regional integration, and coined the concept of a new continentalism. He argues that a new transnational configuration is emerging in Asia, driven by economic growth, rising energy demand, and the erosion of long-standing geopolitical divisions. His new Silk Road is not far from the idea of President Park's Eurasia Initiative and Silk Road Express. The GTI framework, long dormant, is now being used by partner countries to springboard new regional cooperation in transportation, construction, and logistical projects. Research by the Greater Tumen Initiative organization forecasts that, for example, North Korea, the projects will activate the local economy of Rason, as well as improving economic ties with Northeast Asia and Mongolia. For Russia, such projects will resolve the congestion of the Far Eastern ports and will modernize and strengthen the Eurasian logistics network of the Russian railway. Furthermore, Russia's economic and political influence in the DPRK and in the whole Northeast Asian region as a railway and energy power should further increase. For South Korea, it can look forward to easing of political tension on the Korean peninsula with development around Rajin, based on a trilateral cooperation among the ROK, DPRK, and Russia. The project also will link South Korea more closely to Mongolian and Siberian mineral energy resources and stimulate greater economic growth. And as for China, GTI cooperative actions will promote economic development in the 3 northeastern provinces and permit acquisition of energy-related commodities from Russia, Mongolia, and the DPRK. For Mongolia, the limitations of a landlocked country will be overcome, and economic development will be accelerated on northern and eastern exits. Even for Japan, especially its western region of Niigata, Tottori, and Kanazawa, GTI integration can be another commercial entry into Northeast China, Russia, Mongolia, and Europe. Any Northeast Asian railway cooperation model must create an international transport network through a cooperation consultative group mechanism. The GTI plan, through the UNDP, uses the existing international railway cooperation bodies and organizations and does not require the establishment of additional international organizations, which of course would be more costly. And as the 2013 integrated report on the trans-GTR transport corridors emphasizes that GTI must be an organization that comprehensively deliberates on the bilateral and multilateral issues of international railway operation from the perspective of joint benefits in the Northeast Asian region. Therefore, organization of a Northeast Asian Railway Cooperation Consultative Group requires step-by-step strategies because stakes of the related countries are different and the standards of railway infrastructures and services in the countries vary significantly. In the short term, the task is to develop multilateral projects and resolve issues in a timely manner, which might best be accomplished in a pilot program. This would build trust among the partner countries and come to practical solutions to interface among the connecting routes and customs operations to resolve the bottlenecks in each country. Positive results should generate international publicity, and that then should attract more private capital. Ultimately, the GTI's long-range goal is to facilitate what is called a Northeast Asia Peace Project through the Northeast Asia Railway Cooperation Consultative Group that would develop into an independent organization of Northeast Asian railway cooperation. The key functions of this organization would be to promote railway operational improvement, set freight and passenger railway rates, and improve railway routes and signal systems. Such efforts are aimed at maximizing the integrative role of transport passengers of all varieties in a vibrant economic market. If this goal is one day realized, the benefits to the GTI partner countries, China, Russia, Mongolia, North Korea, South Korea, will be substantial. Furthermore, an enhanced South Korean Mongolian energy mineral trade connection along a new rail network would be in both nations' best interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Campy. So now we can go to you and have some questions. So please raise your hand, your name, state your name and your organization, and ask a question. Start right here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Susan Lawrence with the Congressional Research Service. Thank you, Dr. Campy, for that wonderfully rich, detailed introduction to the whole transportation situation across all those countries. I guess I've been following the Tumen River Initiative for 20-some years now, and I remember people being very excited about it in China in the early 90s, and the prospect of the Rajin port, particularly the idea that that would be a deep water port that would allow all those landlocked provinces in northeast China access to the sea. But it sort of feels that over the last 20-some years, none of this has gone very far, and a big reason is North Korea. And a big reason is that the North Koreans have not been desperately keen to cooperate in all the sort of transportation links that have been discussed to get goods to Rajin. And it still seems to me that that's a real sticking point for the whole project, for South Korea's integration into the whole Northeast routes for Mongolia getting access to the sea. It's still Rajin is the key thing. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about what North Korea has been saying, you know, what their attitude has been about towards these various projects. You know, how do you evaluate, I guess, the prospect of North Korea being willing to make this all happen? That's question one. I have a whole bunch, but I'll just make one other question, which is the US government has been heavily supporting a new Silk Road project, which is making Afghanistan into a transportation hub, but also involving Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and other of the stands. And I'm wondering if there's been any discussion of that new Silk Road initiative, the US New Silk Road initiative, being linked up with some of these Tumen River initiatives and the other, and President Park's initiative, if there's any talk of linking these. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of the perspective and versus the reality of the Greater Tumen Initiative, you're correct that the early enthusiasm in the 90s quickly dissipated, and we had political strategic problems slow down the process so that you had very, very little momentum and any progress. However, in the past, I would say really since 2010, there has been a change in this situation, primarily because the dynamics between the Russian and Chinese partners in this consortium has changed. when China and Russia in the 90s were looking at how to do a pipeline so that Russia would be able to send natural gas to China, they made the conscious decision, after much lobbying by the Mongolian government, not to go through Mongolia, which was, for Mongolia, a lost opportunity because it was, for sure, in theory at least, the cheapest and most direct route. But since that decision was made, what we have is a great increase in trade between the Chinese and the Russians, where because of the lack of rail transportation routes that are efficient and cost-effective, China has done a lot of rail building, as you know, with Central Asian republics. But it does not help in terms of the Chinese development strategy for its Northeast Asian provinces in the Manchurian area. And because you still have the bottleneck, even if you bring the Central Asian minerals into China, you still have to move them across Inner Mongolia. And that railway is extremely over capacity now. So they need to solve the problem of another route. And because of the pressure on both sides, because of that increased trade, I think that made a difference in how they looked at and negotiated with Mongolia and with North Korea. And to show that it did affect the North Koreans is the long talked about Rajin-Khasan spur, which is actually 54 kilometers and not long at all, actually, after all the investment and more than 5 years of construction, did open in September. So that's a concrete thing that happened, not a promise, not a goal. And because we have that link, now the question is, how do other spurs move in the Russian railway to branch off from the main track that goes up to Vladivostok and instead bring some of the traffic into Khasan in Russia and then down to Rajin. So first of all, you had to have the actual spur created. It's there now. So in my opinion, we have the physical infrastructure that shows us that we are beyond talking. Now the problem is how do you go and bring all this potential freight, whether it's coming from the north through Russia or whether the south up to Rajin, how do you bring that into a port that's not well developed? That's why we have the Putin-Pak summit, to talk about the actual funding mechanism for this. That's why the GTI created at this consultative meeting in Mongolia now, after 20 years of talk, an actual association of banks that are involved in import-export. Because what they're looking for are the financing mechanisms, and one of the first places they will go when I talked in general about a pilot project, I think will be to do something very specific in the logistics area of Rajin. Your second question on the U.S. interest in this Silk Road concept, many of these countries in the region are talking about a Silk Road Express, Silk Road Initiative. We have China talking about it. We now have President Park talking about it. The United States considers support or non-support. Mongolia is talking about this. The Russian railways talk about this. So what we need now is we have a lot of people talking about it because it's a catchy phrase. We've got to have more cooperation amongst the big powers in the region and the interested powers outside the region. We haven't had that much cooperation. But through these consultative mechanisms, in my opinion, and through publicity, that we will have more interest from the different partners in developing a more coherent strategy. And that's why I think President Park's announcement is particularly important, because she and her government are close to the Americans. So I don't myself know that the U.S. government is in consultation with Russia on this issue or with other partners in the region, but because of the close connection between the Korean and the American governments, I think that that kind of cooperation will bring the idea about the changes and the new momentum in this field among railway construction. Now, I will also put a caveat here. The United States tried to become involved in helping modernize the locomotives on the Ulaanbaatar Railway through our Millennium Challenge account, as you know. And this was blocked at the very last minute by the Russian government, by the Russian railway partner. So this opportunity to put an American-made important locomotive on the railway was stopped because Russia was afraid of the American connection in Mongolia on that railway. So again, this is a way where I don't know how successful the Americans would be partnering with the Koreans, let's say North Koreans, Mongolia, Russia, on any railway development. But if the Americans are partnering with a less aggressive or a less frightening South Korea, for example, or with Japanese entities, I think that that kind of progress is more likely, at least in the beginning stages, to be successful.
Other questions? Yep, in the back.
Thank you. Yan Ho Kim with Voice of America. Let me follow up on the North Korea being sticking point in this greater picture of Northeast Asia. You mentioned the Rajin Hassan project, which should demonstrate how important this project is and how promising this is. But so far, I guess North Korea has been willing to get involved in this railway project, just limited to their special economic zone. And if you want to see this greater picture being worked out, North Korea should be willing to and able to open up their deep inland part that can be the linkage between North Korea, South Korea, and all the way to Mongolia. So, do you think North Korea is willing to? To what extent North Korea is willing to open up their territory to this greater project? Thank you.
In the beginning of my paper, I talk about each GTI country has its own agenda or objectives, which are not shared by the other members. Mongolia, for example, Mongolia's goal is to stop the Chinese monopoly, diversify its trade partners. This is not the goal of South Korea. It's not necessarily the goal of Russia, but it is its specific goal. And this mechanism, this momentum allows them to do that. We also should look upon this when we think about what is North Korea trying to do. North Korea wants somebody else to pay for the modernization of Rajin, a port that's totally in their hands, far from the South Korean DMZ, that they can use to get their products out and get imported goods in. So I think that they are not looking at this issue from the point of diversifying to other special economic zones so quickly, or opening up other areas of the North to enjoy the benefits of greater rail or pipeline infrastructure. Their goal is to get Rajin up and running because they can control it. So it is, to me, an example of each country has its specific, maybe quite short-term or even medium-term goal. And now, for the first time in the 20 years of the GTI, not the goal of each nation isn't the same, but the momentum and push within each of the member states to get something done which they can utilize the GTI rail infrastructure network as a way to fulfill their own goal is coming together. And that's why I think the momentum is increasing. We're looking at, you can't look at it from such a macro level. I think it's working, and it may work. How far it will go, I don't know. But it may work over the next few years because of the fact that each of the member countries has their own specific goal, and it just happens the GTI rail structure could accommodate this goal.
Okay, other questions? Yes, towards the end.
Hi, Troy Sanger with the Korea-Economic Institute. I have two questions related to, I guess, the rail networks. One, we often hear this talk of the development of sort of like a trans-Eurasian railroad. And I guess the question would be, first off, how beneficial and important do you say this? Is this really something that's more going to be a regional infrastructure to help ship, goods within the region, or something to Europe? Because when I talk to people, my understanding is essentially that other than the fact that it's a shorter travel time, that it's essentially much cheaper to ship by boat to Europe from Asia. So I guess the question is, do you envision this more as something that's more for regional use to connect production networks within South Korea, potentially if you ever solve the North Korean question, Russia, China, and other countries? And then two, you had mentioned the issue of having different gauges and different track lines and everything. I guess my question would be is, how much of an issue is that really needs to be resolved? And the reason I asked that is there was an article in The Economist, and it kind of surprised me back in the fall, that even within the European Union, most of the countries have different rail line standards. And perhaps Europe is the most efficient country, but if in Western Europe it works, I guess how much work really needs to be done to connect the railroads other than actually hooking the lines up through North Korea? Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the viability of this as a zone to transit goods between Europe throughout the whole Eurasian continent to the Pacific, I think that that's sort of a medium-term possibility. In reality, there are certain minerals which are needed because of their scarcity or their special importance, like uranium, by partners that are in Europe or in the Pacific. Other minerals, like coal and copper, are not. And for example, for Mongolia, it has a lot of coal, and although South Korea could become a potential partner, Japan could become a partner for its coal, in reality, it looks at a situation where China is the main customer, it's going to stay the main customer. Now, if you look at the situation in the Russian coal fields, the Russian coal fields to the west are pretty close to exhausted. The eastern ones, in the Siberian areas, are the places where they could develop. But the problem is, because of the weather conditions, it has already been determined by the Russians that developing their Siberian coal fields is not as cheap as importing Mongolian or Chinese coal. So the Siberian fields, which could be a rival to Mongolian or North Korean coal production, are not going to come online very soon. But Russia needs coal. So within the Russian sphere, they are going to face the problem of their coal, which is in the West and is in use in the major cities in the West, is slowly disappearing. And they're going to have to find new sources of coal, and it's going to be in the West. So that means they have pressure to develop those Trans-Siberian Railway links and improve them westward, which is towards Europe. But that's their specific goal. Do I think that Mongolia or North Korea or even Seoul is interested in sending its products vis-a-vis the long Trans-Siberian Railroad to Europe, to the markets in Europe? No, that's not their main goal. But because of pressures within the Russian system, they're going to have to develop and improve the structure that goes towards the west. Other countries, the pressure is to go towards the east. So because of the different pressures within the domestic situation of the different countries, you have actually an expansion and improvement scenario on both sides, which then would link Europe to the East Asia. The other thing that these new railway studies are showing, both the one done by the RZD itself and the new one coming out with Pittman, is that because of the failing Russian coal production and the use of alternative pipelines, the actual freight carriage within Russia of movement of these mineral products is becoming less and less. But in the short term and the midterm, because the Russians haven't diversified to other energy sources, they are going to need to get the products, whether it's coal or whether it's other forms of energy, along the railway and move them to the Western places. Also, Russia sees that eventually, in terms of its long-term goals, the railway becomes important if they can compete better in terms of price with the alternative ways of moving the energy resources. And they can't compete unless they modernize. And so every country in the region's goal, perhaps with the exception of South Korea, is to get somebody else to pay for it. Your second point was?
It's about how.
Oh, the rail gauge.
They're connecting the railways because of gauges, because of Europe. They have to gauge.
Right. Well, the gauge between Chinese and Russian is a major difference. But, first of all, what we need are more lines. You need more lines in Siberia, you need more lines in Mongolia. So one of the things that the Mongolians are talking about is you create parallel lines, even parallel to the existing railroad, because we need to have more opportunities to move freight, including south to China. And now Mongolia has, in principle, agreed to a few little Chinese gauge spurs to be built to the Chinese border. But this is also a problem because the Chinese rail system is tremendously overcapacity. So one of the reasons the Mongols, actually much smarter than the World Bank and IMF experts, said we don't want to build Chinese gauge in our country to the south is because when it gets to the border and crosses into China, our products are not getting to customers out to Tianjin or down in south of China or in other parts of China, not at the northern border, where they're not getting to them quicker because everything is jammed up. We need to develop another way to get products out. So the gauge issue now is being looked at by, for example, the Japanese are looking at how do you put these two gauges together? Can you design a product, meaning a locomotive, a train that can use both gauges? Should we have two parallel lines? Right now, it's expensive to have to pick up the carriages like we do now and change the wheels. But because of the pressure of the Russian-China trade, because of the value of minerals in today's market, including Mongolian minerals, because of the drying up for environmental reasons, public pressure for the Chinese to develop their own resources and so instead bring it in from the outside, you have pressures which will accept the higher price that the two gauges result in.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, with that, let's thank Dr. Campy for this interesting discussion on a whole bunch of issues in this region.